Welcome to Business Agility Now, the podcast powered by Scaled Agile. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. This is the place to get advice, stories, and perspectives to help you work differently and build the future. Thanks for listening and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts.
Yuval, welcome back. When was the last time we did this? Was it at Summit or did we do something in person last year or online? I'm trying to remember.
It was online a bit before that. Yeah. Thank you. Good to be here.
It's crazy to see how many episodes we've actually put out. I think last year we did close to 70. I mean, that's just the long ones, not the short ones. So it's crazy how much content we've put out. And then I consider this is my fourth year doing it. Boy, there's a whole lot of audio of me talking out there. And is this our second or our third time together? Well, at any rate, for those of you that may have not heard the last time, who the heck are you, Yuval?
That's a very good question. Some days I think I'm the Agile Maverick or the SAFe Maverick, kind of walking outside the lines. I'm a SAFe Fellow, professional Scrum trainer, based in Boston, 3 kids, and I help organizations that are trying to apply agility at scale in weird environments, leverage the approach that makes sense.
Let's talk about weird. What constitutes a weird environment?
So one of the first marketing organizations that try to apply agility at scale, designing razors, applying it to accelerate FDA approval for drugs. Those are some weird off the beaten path environments.
That is definitely a weird one. So my sister actually, I won't get into the weird degree she has, but right now she's working with the FDA through the U.S. Patent Office, approving new research methods and uses of organic material in the production of drugs. I say that very slowly because it's weird. I'm not sure I understand it exactly, but so for those unique contexts that you're working in, there's a reciprocal of people doing as equally weird things in the pipeline.
Right now I'm helping a big fintech figure out enterprise portfolio agility using product orientation. So that's not that weird. I think that's a repeating pattern. So sometimes it's weird. Sometimes it's just helping people do good work.
From your perspective, what's the difference between a bank and a fintech company? So like a traditional, where's the line? So what says, let's say I don't know, Bank of America, for example, is a bank. What's the difference between them and a fintech in your perspective?
Good question. I don't know that it's the formal definition, but I see it as organizations that use financial technology or use technology as the main driver for finance. I guess banks will become fintechs or are already fintechs. But those are organizations that are the upstarts in this space.
Yeah, I think that's the line I would draw, right? It's the companies that are building the new way of managing financial data and financial resources, and the companies who are adopting those new things, right? So for the most part, most existing banks and insurance companies, they're maybe doing some innovation on their own, but not the big evolutionary things. Those typically come from the outside and then are either acquired or at least licensed from them. I think the notable exception to that, and this one still blows my mind, USAA owns the patent for mobile check deposits. So for every single mobile check deposit that happens on any bank's application anywhere in the US, USAA gets a little slice of that penny. It's a pretty cool one.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about products. So, working in fintech and working in a lot of the interesting spaces that we all do, we've talked a lot about product for years. And, in my opinion, the discipline of product management is older than anything that we do in tech, right? If you think of consumer products and the ideas of building a product line, understanding the market and getting meaningful products to market at a profitable price point, that art is old. It's not new. Actually, I first learned product management outside of technology. I was working for a consumer products company, Under Armour, and I learned the whole art and science of product line management, understanding a collection, understanding market research, competitor research, and just all of the things that go into product outside of tech. And I think as technology becomes more central to organizations instead of just that weird thing that sits over in the corner in its own operating unit, the concept of how we manage tech is what's new, right? So when we look at, again, the discipline of product management, not a lot new there, right? It's basic patterns, it's basic research methods, and we can obviously apply tech to make them better, faster. But product management in the scope of tech is newer. So in your travels around the world and some of the interesting clients that you work with, what are some of the things that you're seeing? Like, what is new and interesting in 2025 be what was there 2019?
There are a couple of, one of the things that I'm seeing is more and more organizations that have gone through the Agile transformation the first time around and didn't really pay attention to the product, the real product orientation piece, are waking up. We're seeing more and more IT organizations that are realizing there's more to agility than just managing your projects in an agile fashion. They're realizing that in order to really deliver outcomes, deliver the value on your agility, you need to orient teams around outcomes to have them really relate to the business that they own and empower them. That's a trend that we're seeing much more out there today than 2019. But I'll actually go back to 2020, where I started working with Gillette. Gillette was looking at how to use Agile and, a scaled Agile Scrum approach to designing a new razor and commercializing it, not just the R&D piece, but everything around it. And you spoke about product management in consumer goods companies. You can imagine that the organization that came up with the term brand manager know a thing or two about product management. That was the fun exercise, teaching these people about product ownership, which is different, but there are a lot of things that they taught me.
Yeah. Well, in all honesty, I mean, my perspective on product ownership v. product management comes from my understanding of category management. It's different terms, but it's the same concept, which is breadth versus depth. You might have a category manager, aka a product manager, that has a broad perspective of the entire solution, right? In my context, footwear, apparel, accessories, and how that relates back to the overall brand strategy, right? So they have a breadth of perspective versus the product line manager or product owner has the depth of knowledge, right? They might be the expert within that category of apparel, of footwear, of accessories.
I wish, right? That's what we want to see as SAFe Fellows, these people that really understand how this framework should be used.
I've seen that all at Nike and some of those other companies, and that's just how they work. And that's the exact dynamic that you're right. I would love to see most other companies embrace as they go down this path of product management. It's, to this idea that these things aren't brand new. They've been well proven for a lot of years. Like, let's just go learn from them instead of trying to argue about the nuance of, this versus that and all the methods that, people get in hot debates about.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at it, even an organization like Gillette or other consumer goods companies, when you look at the way they manage their portfolio, they manage a lot of projects. And because they manage a lot of those projects, those hit teams that essentially do work. And even for these organizations that are experts at product, they struggle with the notion of creating an empowered team that owns that product. There's the ownership of the product, but the work that happens on the product is spread very widely throughout the organization. So it's hard for people in the trenches doing the work to actually focus on the product and do right by that product. It's hard to even find one person that owns the product end to end, like the model that you described. And the same is happening in IT. In IT, we manage the projects, and because of that, those projects need people. And the problem is that a lot of the time, because we're afraid of choosing to work on fewer projects, because we're afraid to actually change the teams to own products, we end up with people that are spread around multiple products, and even product owners that don't really own products.
Well, and that's a good point. I think in tech, what we see is that decision-making authority and even the content authority is spread across multiple layers of management. So like in a lot of organizations I've worked with, you typically see whoever owns the P&L, by definition, like that person is actually the product manager because they hold all decisions, they hold all financial data, they hold anything that relates with a check, they hold that. And then by the time that's diluted through their management chain and you get to a product manager, well, the product manager becomes a feature scribe, right? They don't actually do the research. They don't actually have the decision-making authority. They're just writing the features that someone tells them to. And then that distills to the product owner, where the product owner is not actually making decisions about their product. They're just writing some stories and trying to prioritize them based on what they're told. And I think that's the biggest challenge I see in a lot of enterprise contexts, is that people have the role title, but they're not doing the role as it's intended. And the result is that, well, things don't feel good, right? They don't move as fast as they're intended. The other components of the system don't work as intended because, I mean, again, that authority, that decision-making authority is centralized. And when you think about the history of tech and kind of the Tayloristic Jack Welch model for how many tech organizations are still run, well, I mean, I guess that makes sense because those people are afraid to give up decision-making authority because at every turn, we're still not really good at quantifying how IT contributes value to the organization. We still look at it as a cost center. So these P&L owners in IT are essentially IT relationship managers trying to justify why we fund their organizations every year. So they're afraid to give away that decision-making authority. And by the way, the people that they're building their products for, in a lot of organizations, you have to have a different badge to get to the floor where those people are. They might work within a different operating unit within that company, and they're not easy to talk to. And we can say this till we're blue in the face, but it's a systemic problem, right? It's not that we don't have the ideas and the mechanisms for how to address it. It's that from an organizational design standpoint, it's a lot harder than just waving a wand. I know one of my very first clients that I ever had in this space, I first engaged with them in 2013. So it's been 12 years. And it's just this year, after first contact, a lot of work, 12 years, they're finally integrating their operating companies. It was 9 independent operating units where the central unit was a services entity, which was meant to be revenue zero, which is where IT sat. And this year, they're finally consolidating and saying, we're one company. We no longer have these walls. It was so bad at one point, Yuval, where if a leader from one operating unit wanted to meet with the leader of another operating unit, they had to schedule some kind of a public session and hope nobody else showed up. Because if their competitors saw that they were acting as one company, there was a lot of bad things that could happen. It was crazy. So when we talk about how we intend things to work, people will be very quick to say, oh, well, that doesn't work because it's not working, which is not a false statement. But the why is so much more complex.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one thing that I've been thinking about as we were talking through this is the fact that we're calling people product owners when they're not, when they're backlog owners, what's the effect of that from a change management perspective? Would it be more transparent to actually have another name in Scrum, in Agile, in SAFe, or the situation where you're not really a product owner, where you do the things that need to be done, that's relationship management, owning a backlog, helping manage a team, manage relationships with other teams. But to clarify, there's a threshold at which you become a product owner. And when you're a product owner, you have deep expertise and you own a leading indicator. You own something that can really make an impact all the way to an internal or external customer. And if we have that, maybe it will help us see where our organization is and take some action towards becoming a bit more product oriented.
So I'm sure, Yuval, in your travels this year, I mean, you've run into conversation around product operating model. So before we kind of dive into what that is, from what you're seeing and what you're feeling, do you feel like the product operating model conversation is starting to change perspectives? Are people starting to look at how they approach product differently? Are you seeing good conversations as a result? I guess is my question.
It depends. I mean, we're both consultants. It depends. Some conversations are better. There are people that really use it to look differently at what they're doing. It reminds me of the different conversations I've had with people around Scrum when we started teaching them Kanban. It's not that it's dramatically new. Pull is part of Scrum, Pull, is part of Kanban, but by providing that lens, you start to recognize some things. By talking about product orientation, you start to really understand what do we mean by organizing around value, for example. By assuming variability and preserving options and focusing on outcomes, and, the features might change. People even start to think differently about PI planning once they start to talk about product orientation. Having said that, I also encountered the organizations where the product operating model is just the newest shiny object, silver bullet that they use to explain to themselves why the previous thing didn't work. SAFe didn't work for us. Let's use product operating model. Hey, is it really going to help if we're just going to call our teams of teams product and, start using a different lingo if we're not willing to really tackle what's broken? That's what I see more often than not when some companies just use product operating model as an excuse to sell another consulting gig.
Well, and, we've seen that with all the work we've been doing for a long time too. And the struggles and frustrations are, well, you're using different terms to do the same things that you've always done. You're not actually changing your behaviors or anything like that. And it sounds like, right, we're back in this pattern of doing the same things with different words and expecting different outcomes.
This episode is brought to you by the 2025 SAFe Summit, Sorrento, Italy. Invest in your future by connecting with SAFe professionals from Europe and beyond. Experience keynotes, case studies, interactive exhibits, and unmatched networking in a stunning setting. Register now at safesummit.com.
So from what you're seeing, I mean, what really are, like, if you had to describe the product operating model, like, what does it look like? What is there, what, if anything, is different? Like, what are some of the really cool things that it brings to the table?
An emphasis on empowered product teams is one of the biggest things that the product operating model brings. An emphasis on empowered teams that hunt an outcome. They move from working on a book of work, a set of features, defined scope, to this is the outcome that we want to achieve. Now we have freedom, flexibility to figure out how. That's not anything new, to be honest. If you really look at into the Agile principle, the SAFe principle, they cover all of that, but it doubles down on these things. It's harder to ignore those things when you're following a product operating model. And it also emphasizes steering with evidence, making some assumptions, being clear about the assumptions that you're making, what are the bets, and managing to these bets.
I mean, to be honest, I think I like the sound of it. It doesn't sound too dissimilar from the intent of a lot of the tools that we have, right? I mean, we talk about the most important thing coming out of PI planning are your objectives, right? What's the value we're going to deliver? And then we kind of negotiate what features we might deliver to achieve that, with the goal of let's do as little work possible to maximize this outcome. And the same thing with iteration goals, right? I mean, this is what we intend to deliver over the next iteration, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, or whatever. And the stories are how we might get there, but it's not a commitment. And I think where a lot of people get sideways is that they commit to the backlog or they commit to the specific features. And I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are afraid of PI objectives, that are afraid of iteration goals. and they're afraid to talk about them. So, I mean, if this expands the conversation to put a higher emphasis and importance on maximizing the art of the amount of work not done, building the right thing, and focusing on outcomes, shoot, I mean, it sounds like it's a pretty big win for the system that you and I both love.
It is. It is. Let's just be honest about it, though. There are a couple of other things at play. One is the people that are selling product operating models, some of them, especially the evangelists for those, have an interest of showing that their thing is the best and throwing FUD and mud at other things, the market.
Yeah, our thing is only good if the other thing's bad.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. That's the dynamic out there. Another thing is it requires doing SAFe, Scrum, Agile well to be product oriented. It's both an opportunity to improve how organizations do Agile and SAFe. And now, for example, I'm working with that organization that is using SAFe as the way to actually instantiate a product operating model. And most of it is SAFe.
Yeah.
Now, there are some things that we need to think about. Yes, the commitment in PI planning is around objectives, and the purpose of PI planning is to align rather than to plan in detail the entire PI. But it's a slippery slope for a lot of organizations. It's so easy to fall back to our previous behaviors if we really want to plan in depth. So we need to emphasize those things. And I think we as a community in SAFe, we can use this product-oriented movement as an opportunity to both emphasize some stuff that we already say, as well as reflect on some things like, for example, PI planning. If we really look at product-oriented models, product orientation, let's be honest, can we reimagine, like we're reimagining SAFe, can we reimagine some of the sacred cows like PI planning and make them more product-oriented, outcome-oriented, and discuss less deep?
Well, I think that's natural. I think there's still steps to get to any of this that have to be done first, right? You can't just have like some sort of a product-oriented planning horizon if you're not really good at understanding what your products are and your architecture is not good, right? Because I think, the struggle that a lot of enterprises have is they argue and fail to align on what their products even are. So unless we can get over that hurdle, well, then product-based planning is still a challenge because we don't know what our products are. And if our architecture is still a mess, right? If we haven't embraced, continuous delivery, if we haven't automated, if we just haven't cleaned up our house, it's going to be hard again to have good focus on product if our product is messy. So I think the foundations and the why behind, what brought SAFe to be what it is, right? Those things are still required. You can't just start with a product-centric view and have a messy house. So we still have to get back at, we have to be good at DevOps. We have to be good at CI/CD. We have to be good at automation. We have to be really clear and aligned about what are our products. We have to agree that we need to align our teams around those products and the delivery of value through those products and have a clear understanding of what the value is this product defines, what's its sunset strategy, what are we investing in for Horizon 2 to improve this product, what's the Horizon 3 replacement for this product. I think those are the foundations that before we can even be good at product, we have to align around the foundations of what it means to be a product-centered organization.
I'll add one more thing to that list for you. What we're seeing in that organization, and I've seen in others in the past, is that the conversations at the portfolio level, if you make those conversations product-oriented, if you emphasize outcome-oriented strategic teams rather than book of work management, if you talk about what are the leading indicators and can we map those leading indicators to product groups, ideally to portfolios or to art, to development value streams, managing epics with an eye towards discovery and evidence-based leadership. There are a couple of interesting things that happen. One is the portfolio leaders start to think in a product-oriented fashion. And even if the organization is not there yet, they start to push it in the right direction. They see the gap. And if any behavior that we manage to change at the portfolio level is a cream tab for the organization, we identify leading indicators instead of a book of work. Going back to the conversation earlier that we've had, this is a much better way to align a team, to align a set of teams. This is what we want you to focus on. Not the book of work, but this is how we want you to move the needle on something important to the business. Those conversations are game-changing.
So absolutely, you're right. Right. I think before that can happen, what needs to change is how people are incentivized. I mean, I've seen this so many times where, I'll be speaking to a group of executives or leaders and they'll say, yeah, you're absolutely right about all of these things. We agree with it. We're really smart people. We see it. We're aligned. However, my long-term incentive model is based on these very specific metrics, whether it's project outcomes, whether it's throughput, whatever it might be. They're incentivized to manage the book of work. So no matter how right you are or how much they agree with you, they're going to behave based on their incentive structure and how they're evaluated. So I think before we can get to a place where we're really product-centric and we have good product behaviors at the portfolio and throughout the system, we've got to change how we're incentivized. And that's one of the things I think is really cool, like, again, to contrast. And I think we can learn so much from these consumer product companies. That's how they are incentivized. There is no category manager, general manager, chief product officer that's incentivized based on throughput, based on managing a book of work. They're all incentivized based on category performance, SKU performance, profitability, market penetration, all of those things. So I think why you can look at those companies and say, yeah, they've got product figured out. It's because the system is tuned to be a product system. And I think a lot of the companies that we work with, and it's not even the tech native companies, right? It's the companies that are banks, that are healthcare systems, that are utility companies. I mean, just pick like your large traditional business. They are not structured to reward that kind of behavior. So what I think is cool about Palm and what I do appreciate about it is that at the altitude it comes in, a lot of the agile transformation, safe work that we've done, like any of that tech work, is typically a middle out process, right? Where it comes in with some level of middle management and it, cascades down and then it maybe goes up a little bit and then it hits a glass ceiling. And we don't get the outcomes we want because the behaviors of senior and executive management aren't incentivized to make the system work well. So I think the cool thing about, Palm being walked in by your McKinseys and people like that at the board and executive level is that there's at least a chance that we can have a conversation to change the incentive structure. What I worry that's going to happen is that these things come in and then the football is passed to the same middle managers and we get the same outcome. Like what I worry is that we're going to skip the decision-making layer that has the opportunity to change the system. And we're going to be in the same place, in 2 years that we've been for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I'm already seeing it, to be honest. The question is how to change the game. We haven't figured out how to really change the game that is being played here. But at least what I've done is I've used SAFe, I've used Kanban, I've used Agile to provide a mirror. The mirror shows the organization how product-oriented it is, how good at flow it is or not. And then there's an opportunity to have a conversation. The higher you can go up that conversation, the better the chance that you'll be able to do something about it. And you won't always be able to do something, but I'd rather create this understanding that all we're doing is we're improving some things, but we're also making transparent some things. And just sticking to managing the work the way it is being managed and not showing that mirror, we're doing a disservice to the organization as Agilists.
How do you When you show up and have that kind of a perspective these days, like when you say, as an Agilist, how is that landing in enterprise today?
Being an Agilist in 2025 is not as easy as it was in 2020, right? Agile has some sort of toxic nature to it these days. So you need to figure out what is the right framing to come in and do the work. And I'm not sure I figured it out, to be honest. Product-oriented, helping organizations with ways of working.
I think it's got to be outcome focused.
Yeah, it needs to be outcome focused, but the outcome for us is the more streamlined organization with better traction. That's my bet right now. We're improving organizational traction and out.
We'll help you build a mechanism that allows you to test faster, fail faster, and deliver more to the bottom line with greater efficiency. I mean, I think the outcome is the same. I think that's always been the outcome we've been after. I think what's different is that in 2020, when the world economy looked very different, it's easy to focus on the things that feel good, right? We can talk a lot more about people and behaviors and how we want the system to feel. And I think in the economic context that we've been in for the last 2 years, it's more about how do we achieve our earnings targets? How do we achieve our margins with the greatest efficiency? Because money isn't as easy as it was 5 years ago. I think the objective has always been the same. I think the focus of the conversation is what changes based on different economic pressures. And I think where we kind of got a little sideways is there's a lot of great people who are well-intended who are focused on the emotional, the empathetic, the soft aspects of what can happen as you become an Agile organization, the very people-focused things. And they never really got good at communicating the value-based aspects. And I think that there's a lot of conflict between the people who are very much focused on the people and the value that's provided by taking care of the people, and those who view the system and the need to hit those targets and the outcomes as a primary. I don't think that it's appropriate to be entirely in one camp or the other. I think that some people are having trouble coming to the middle. And I think that leads to some very conflicted conversations.
That's a big part of it. I also think we're seeing very different markets out there. There are very different segments in the market. There are the organizations, let's call them late adopters of Agile ideas, of iterating fast and making bets and steering with evidence and empowering teams. Those organizations need a lot of prescription. They need a lot of process, and they appreciate it. I think they still appreciate it. They struggle to do it well. They appreciate the need for something like that. They don't want to take, principles and roll. They maybe even can't. And there are the organizations that used to be the early adopters for these ideas, and those organizations with a lot of vocal people that represent that, they're frustrated of where this movement is. They're frustrated that the movement has gone mainstream. Mm-hmm. They don't appreciate what the other people need. They're thinking of their own needs, but they're not the audience for a lot of those products. If I'm an early adopter that used Agile back 20 years ago, I probably don't need the same product that I'll need if I'm a CIO where my organization is the brownfield environment with tons of architectural debt and iron spaghetti, and I can't go and give an edict like Bezos had that says, the next year we're going to work just on architecture and get to 2 pizza teams with APIs, and nobody's going to dependent on other teams or you're fired. Most organizations don't have the leeway to go and do something like that, so they need some way to manage that complexity. A lot of people don't recognize it or are choosing to ignore it. And we're seeing the dynamics between these two worlds, especially when you have an echo chamber like LinkedIn where those people meet. I don't think there's a lot of that going on in the trenches themselves. In the trenches, it's more what you're describing.
Sure. And I think it's interesting. You hear a lot about, people always like to look at the tech native companies and say, well, they're not doing X or Y. But it's because they're tech native. It's because, the board of Amazon had an appetite to say, we're cool if you don't make any profit and lose money for the next 10 or 15 years. Like, that's fine with us because we understand where you're going. The trouble that a lot of companies are in right now is because of the polar opposite, where you must increase revenue by X amount this year or else. So they go out and acquire something to get that revenue, but they also don't have the time to integrate it. So you've got a lot of things that are just kind of like hodgepodge together, which creates your technical debt. I think as professionals, we sometimes lose empathy for why companies are where they are. We like to say big sweeping statements and make big promises around things like, well, this is your silver bullet or whatever. And, I was a big consulting sales guy. I mean, I get those motivators too, but it doesn't make them right. Like, there is nothing that you're going to come in and do that's going to make all of your problems disappear without doing the hard work. And I think if we could get better at communicating that and helping organizations create a plan that gets them out of the troubled situations that they're in. And by the way, capacity allocation is a super easy tool to start doing that. Then we're always going to be in this space. I think what's going to hurt these companies the most is if they continue to ignore the foundations that will allow them to operate more like a tech company. The world's going to get exponentially faster every quarter, and they're going to get further behind. I mean, it's the old proverb of slow down to speed up. If you don't slow down to fix your house, or if you look at like some of the car companies, I think, they've recognized that we don't have time to fix our house, so we're just going to build a new one, right? So like if you look at Ford, I think GM did this. I know like Audi and others have done this. They stand up independent subsidiaries to build the technology for their cars, greenfield, because it's a lot easier for them to do that than to try and fix the old stack that they have. It's less expensive, it's faster, it gets them the outcomes they need faster. I think when you look at some of these insurance companies that have systems that are decades old that, quite frankly, people my age and younger have no idea how to work on because we weren't taught on how to think, in a linear coding fashion. COBOL makes no sense to me. It might be easier to start over. Like, clean your data up, get that good, and then build new systems. Because if we continue trying to maintain these archaic hodgepodge systems, they're not going to get any faster. And the knowledge to maintain an evolution or create evolution in those systems is getting less and far more expensive. And it's a very clear horizon of when that knowledge just won't be there anymore.
I think that all makes sense. I guess what we also need to acknowledge as interventionists.
I like that word. Oh, Yuval, you've given me a new buzzword for my LinkedIn. I'm an interventionist, an enterprise interventionist. I like it.
The size of the intervention could be appropriate for the impact of the intervention. And one of the things, I'm just thinking out loud, so it takes me time to work through this, but intervening at the layer that you're talking about is hard, right? So a lot of organizations, what they do is they slap some lipstick on a pig. And way too often, we as consultants are allowing that to happen. We're game for that, right? We're willing to come in and say, okay, let's take your existing groups and call them different names and train people and introduce process where the process can help a bit, but it cannot really change the game. It might be the only thing that you can do right now, in which case, okay, but the amount of investment in that process should be appropriate to the outcome that you're getting from it. And I think it's upon us as interventionists to look in the mirror and acknowledge, what's the bang for the buck for the interventions that we're providing, and how can we not just maximize our consulting engagements, but also do good by figuring out what's the most appropriate intervention here. And if the most appropriate intervention is to actually start with seeing how the work flows, or doing a little bit to reorganize around value where you can, and not necessarily go all aboard with agile teams and processes and ceremonies on the same amount of work, to say no. To say it doesn't make sense to go and do all of that unless you're willing to actually make a change, because the impact of that is not going to be huge. And we'll meet again in 2 years, and you'll have many more people that are using different, but the outcomes are not there. I was just talking to a big bank in Israel earlier this week that reported they have tribes, they have a lot of agile routines. The business is not yet seeing the outcomes. They have improved throughput, but the business is not seeing the outcome. That is an indication that probably they're not product-oriented enough, so we had that conversation. But it's also a question of, we invested a lot in this. What is the outcome that we got? Maybe we now have the infrastructure to actually take the next step. Maybe. Like we've improved continuous integration, continuous delivery. Teams are ready to take the next step. In a lot of cases, that's not even the case.
Yuval, you just reminded me of something. It's something I kind of envy about the work that you do, and that I always appreciated about being in a mid-sized consulting firm. And I don't mean the one that I mentioned previously, like before those times. And that was the ability to say, I don't think you're ready, or I don't think we're going to achieve the outcomes. And I kind of looked at it as like the consultant's Hippocratic oath, right? If you want help and you're willing to do the work, I will absolutely help you. But if you want to sit here and blindly pay me to do something that I know is going to fail, well, I'm not going to waste my time or your money. And I think as consultants, we could do better to, exactly as you say, understand when to say no, be clear about explaining why, and leave the door open for future conversation when the organization's ready. I think a lot of, you just look at the LinkedIn or the TikTok and you see all the memes about consultants, and it's because people don't say no when they should. I think, to kind of wrap this up, right? I think, first off, I did a meetup with Charlene Cuenca and Martha Ann Oliver in Charleston a few weeks ago, and it was around this very topic, right? It's about SAFe and POM. I don't see a conflict. I don't. When people come in and say, do this, don't do that, I say, no, bring it in. Like, let's do it. Let's do it together, because the focus in the conversation and the discipline is going to make SAFe work as intended, right? Like all of those great things, like let's do it. And it's really hard for POM to succeed without the structure of execution. So I think there's a marriage there. I think it's great. And I think if POM allows us to have conversations at a leadership level that many of us just haven't had access before, then bring it on. Like, I think it's great. But with that, no matter what it is, we have to be willing to do the hard work. And as consultants, we need to have the discipline to do discovery and be crystal clear about the measurable outcomes that the organization hopes to achieve and how we reflect against those. We can no longer sit back and rest on dogma. We have to provide measurable results. And those results can't be the results that we want. They have to be the results that the client wants. And if the client can't tell you what the results are they hope to achieve, we need to have the courage to say, I don't know that you're ready.
I wish there was the Hippocratic oath for SPCs.
Yuval, I think you and I are in a unique position to propose that.
Yeah.
We could change that, I'm pretty sure. Or at least get our hands slapped for trying. That's kind of the space I live in. I think we have a fellows call next week, right? Huh. I think we could bring that up. I like that for a topic.
Okay. That's an interventionist.
We will be interventionists. We will propose the Hippocratic Oath on the 21st of February. I love it. Is there anything that you would like to close with as it relates to Palm, as it relates to the future of work, or any of the other good things we've talked about?
The only thing I'll mention is that this is on my mind recently. I do the work in the trenches, and I try to write it up whenever I get the chance. I've recently written and released a trail map, not a roadmap, but a trail map that hopes to give people some ideas as they go to, I don't know, ski, snowboard, the slopes of product-oriented portfolios. I call it the Portfolio Agility Trail Map. And if people want to check it out, it's a free email course with some insights and some tips on how to look at this journey of making your portfolio more product oriented, or even recognizing when does it make sense to even look at your portfolio and apply product orientation to it. So people are invited to check it out. I'll provide the link.
All right, Yuval. Well, I appreciate that. Anything you want, we will throw in the show notes. We'll make sure people have access to all of that. And I've seen your trail map and I dig it. So I hope others will as well. Great conversation as always. I don't think I'll see you in Sorrento, but I'm pretty sure I'll see you in Denver, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, my friend. Well, until then, I'm going to get in trouble for this one. I'll do it anyway. Yuval, stay safe.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you hear, please refer us to your friends and colleagues and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Adam Mattis. See you next time.